Um, Thank you for bringing the film. It's just so amazing to see it on this big screen. It's just wonderful. Um, Maybe please tell us a bit about your collaboration with Robert. Um, you mentioned yesterday that you have been working with him for a long time. Maybe if you could talk about your work with him and how you came to make this film.
So I started working with Robert Frank as his video editor in the late 80s, early 90s, and the very first project I worked on with him was a music video for the band New Order. So it was pretty exciting because I love the band, and it was great to meet Robert and work with him. One of the dedications at the end is to Michael Schamberg, the man who used to work with New Order at Factory Records, who kind of paired us together and introduced us. So after that, I lived in the East Village, and my studio was right down the street from him. So I would just walk by his place and run into him and his wife, and we became friends. And I didn't realize that he was so into postcards, and I'm a postcard collector as well. So if I got a good postcard, I would just put one in the slot of his door, and I think that really pretty much cemented the whole thing. But then someone else, I had a meeting with someone who insisted. I worked on a film before this, one other film called Windfall, and it was about wind energy, and I had a meeting with someone, and they were like very gruff, like, oh yes, this film about wind energy. And then I said, well, I thought I would get along with you because of Robert Frank, because he had a relationship with artists, and he like lunged over the table at me and said, you have to do a film about Robert Frank, you have to. And I was like, no, my relationship is with him as his editor. It would be funny for me to direct him. It would be kind of odd. And then I started to think about it, and I started to envision all these ideas, you know. And then once I started to get the ideas, I went over Robert's house, and I said, well, how would you feel about me doing a film about you? And he was like, no, you know, that would be weird. That would be really weird. But then, so I changed the subject, but I could tell he was thinking, and, you know, and then he said, you come back tomorrow. You come back tomorrow, we'll talk about it. So I went back the next day, and he goes, I think it would be a good idea. Let's start next week. And I was like, oh my God. Like, so I was forced into it, you know, but it was really fun for, you know, and he's like that. He's very much like, you get the inspiration, you get the intuition, you just do it, you know. Don't think about it too much. And that's one of the reasons why I love working with him.
I think the style of the film, the editing, the montage, the assemblage, as your company is called, it's amazing, and how you're using music. Maybe if the two of you could answer to the music question, how the research went, but also how Robert's style has influenced your choices of how you worked in this film, if you would answer to that.
Well, I'll answer the part of the non-music part, and then Melinda can come in, the producer, for the music part, because that was the challenge, is really, as you know, for a documentary, to pay for that type of music and to really get artists involved. But as far as the style of it, it was really exciting because I'm also familiar with a lot of Robert's films. I worked on the later ones, but even the earlier ones, I was helping him to preserve and archive the films. So I had them in my mind when I was doing this. And at first I thought I would do a film about Robert as a filmmaker rather than a photographer, because that's what people don't know about. But then he started to talk about film and photography interchangeably, as if they were the same thing. And I realized for him it's just imagery, it's a different technique of the same, just him being an artist. So that's what the film had to be about, and then it became a much bigger film. Lisa Rinsler and Ed Lockman, the two cinematographers, work in documentary, and they also work in feature films, narrative films. So they have a sensibility that I think was very much like Robert's and very much like mine. They have sort of a vision that lends itself to both those things. So I think that that's something that we had to sort of go back and forth. But the meetings that we had in the beginning was how to do something that goes along with Robert's films, but has a voice of its own. So that it's not copying Robert, but it's not so different that you feel removed from it. So I think that was our challenge, and that's a very fine line, and it was exciting to do that. And as far as the music goes, we really needed strong music to stand up to the photographs. And the photographs have a rawness and an energy that really needs something that's iconic and strong. But also we used a lot of music that they're like bootleg copies or live versions, because it sort of has that same rawness to it. But then, of course, after you pick the music and you do all the creative things, there becomes the reality of how do you actually get those artists to agree.
Yeah, and we were incredibly lucky to have Howell Wilner as a music supervisor and Rachel Fox, who works with them, and they just have insane relationships with everyone. And it was like the first week we hired them that they called Bob Dylan's camp and got Bob Dylan to sign on, and then it was like, oh, the floodgates are open. And so we went a little like mad in the candy store, and then had to deal with the reality at the end. And it was, the amazing thing was that all these artists were so excited to be helping a film about Robert Frank, because he's so inspirational to so many people, that they were so excited about it. Then we actually had to deal with the labels, paperwork, and that was another story. And of course the Rolling Stones, which was its
The Rolling Stones were their own
saga. But everybody,
make a film about that.
we were, people were just so excited about a film that would help inspire people. And there's, Robert is so inspiring. So they really were excited about the film, and that was helpful. But it's a lot of artists and a lot of paperwork and a lot of no's and yeses and maybes. But Rachel and Hal, they get the prize for this one.
Yeah. But you know what was really funny though too is some of the music we used, we didn't realize what a personal relationship. We didn't know that Robert was actually the one who introduced Sue Mingus to Charles Mingus. So she's like the head of the estate, and we didn't know that but when we approached her, but then someone told us, we were like, oh.
And everyone was like, oh, you gotta take out the Mingus tracks. Like, you just gotta do
You're
it.
gonna-
Like,
she's
it was
so
really
difficult.
difficult.
She's so difficult.
And then
She'll
we
never
got to
give
her
it
and she
you.
was like,
Of
"Right,
course.
of course you introduced us." Like,
We didn't even know. I said, Robert, why didn't you tell me? He goes, oh, it was a little time ago.
I think what might be nice is to release a soundtrack at some point, if you manage to do that, if you can do that as the film travels after the festivals, as it gets seen. I think a soundtrack would be very nice. One last question, and then we open to the audience. You made a choice to shoot some in black and white and some in color. Can you explain a little bit how that came about?
Well, we shot some tests of Robert in his room, in his workroom, and we shot some in color, and we shot some in black and white. And it was Lisa Rinsler that shot that, and we just sat and had a meeting, and we were like, Robert Frank lives in a black and white world. I mean, it really, you looked at the black and white, and it had this richness and this texture that really lent itself. But then we went to Mavu, and it's so like colorful, and I mean that wasn't really like something I planned. But then when we did the tests and looked at the footage, we realized that it was just so clear to us what should be in black and white and what should be in color.
Please, your questions, raise your hand quite clearly so that you can get the microphone. He's in the middle there.
Hi. Inspiring is the word that struck me or left with me after this film. I'm wondering, as a filmmaker, when you work with someone who has a sort of a clear vision about how they want things to be and look, how do you manage to balance his views and your own views when you make the film?
Well, it's an interesting question because working as an editor, what you try to do is see things through the director's eyes. Like you try to kind of merge with them and try to do what they want. But as a director, you really need to sort of, peel off and go your own way. And having Robert at some point say to me, I trust you, I mean, it really gave me the liberation and the feeling that I should actually take liberty, as much liberty as I could, or as I felt like I could, or I felt like. Actually, I was, one of the things that I think that Robert and I have in common, or, something that we got along when we worked together with, is this idea of spontaneous inspiration, The very first day, I'll tell you a story, the very first day I worked with him, he came over to my studio, and back in the day, this I'm showing my age, of course, but we used to work in tape. So you'd have to rewind and fast forward the tape, and it would get really boring. So what we used to do is sit and watch all the footage and just make little pieces, selects, so that you didn't have to do that. And I remember, I didn't know him that well, so I remember turning around and saying, once we make these selects, are we going to have to go back again? Are we going to change our mind? You're going to change your mind. I'll be prepared for that. And he was like, no, it's fate. Once we make the decision, we go forward. First thought, best thought. We don't go back, we go forward. And I remember at that moment thinking, this is my kind of director. This is somebody I want to work with. So, with that in mind, the very first time I showed him, I thought I was kind of cringing because we took a lot of liberty with the photographs. We actually repositioned a lot of them and reframed a lot of them because of the way that they would sort of like move when you see them in film. And I was nervous about that because I don't know many people that would, do recomposition Robert Frank's photographs. But he said, no, it's fine. He said, you really made them come alive, and I'm happy that you did that. So, that's my attitude about the film is that, he wouldn't want me to just do what he wants. So, I didn't.
In the front here.
I don't really have a question, but in a way it seems so that the film wasn't made, but is. I don't know how to explain it. It's like you didn't work at it at all on the film, but it wasn't just there.
Oh, okay.
So, and I think it's a film about a poet and a man who doesn't have age, something like that.
Right.
So-
That's one of the things.
Thank you so much. That's
Yeah.
the biggest compliment we
It's
could
just
ever
so
receive
easy.
is that this looks effortless. So I thank you.
It was not effortless, though, by the way.
Yes, but it's really, I of course I see that. You just look at it and it's there. Everything, music.
I think that, over the years, Robert Frank and his wife have been such an inspiration to me, not just artistically, but as people. Really, their life, the way they live. The way they live is the way they work. And I think that that's really inspiring to me and seems really strong. And I'm glad that that's your impression of the film, is it's just there, It's the way I feel.
Hi, thank you for the amazing movie. I was wondering how long did it take the process to film and then to edit? And also, I'm always curious how it is to go around with Robert. Does people recognize him today when you're in the city and,
You'd be surprised at how many people do, and how many people he knows, and that just come up and say, oh, I met you back in, 1972, and he has so many visitors, and so many screenings that I go to, people come up and say, oh, I know Robert from, this other thing, where I am friends with his friend, but it was so, I hope it comes out too in the film that we had so much fun. When we went out on those trips, those day trips, to take photographs, we were like, we said goodbye for like an hour. Goodbye, I'm gonna miss you. We had so much fun. So, but it took about 5 years because once we started shooting, we shot for about 3 years on and off, and then I hadn't done any research. So I had to stop and say, okay, so what photographs do we need? What films do we need? And then it opened up this whole other door of, we have to look through all the books, we have to look through all his films, and he's done a film every 2 years his whole life practically. So there's a lot of film footage too to go through, and some of them didn't make it in. A lot of things that we even thought were pretty important didn't make it in the film. So 5 years.
Please raise your hand if you have a question.
I have a question. How many people knew about Robert Frank when they came in? Oh, a lot. Oh, that's more than yesterday. Cool.
It was one of our challenges is how do you make a film for people who love Robert Frank but also don't know him?
Right. Yeah, it's a fine line between, you know, you don't want to tell everybody everything, but then you don't want to give too little. So it was a challenge to do that. The amount of information you can put in a film about a 90-year-old man. Quite a bit. Someone who's so prolific.
And about the work and about the life. I mean,
The work and the life,
the
going
hard,
back and
painful
forth.
stories with the children and
Yeah.
how to deal with that.
That was
But it's all connected, so you
Of
can't
course.
take it out.
Of course.
Yeah. Actually, my next film is going to be about someone who was my best friend and who never became famous but wanted to be, and it's a narrative. So I'm going to start writing a script soon. So this is a good transition into it. It was wonderful working with Lisa Rensler and Ed Lockman, who do feature films, narrative films, to sort of work with them in that way, where you can sort of have a sensibility to do both. Because my next one's going to be based in reality, but a fiction, so a departure. Less editing.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for coming.
And we have a chance to talk outside for